When a black CEO boarded a first-class flight after a long business trip, all he wanted was a quiet meal and a few hours of rest. But when the flight attendant saw his ticket, her smile faded. Moments later, she leaned down and said coldly, "Sir, that meal isn't for your kind." The entire cabin went silent. Passengers turned to look, some in shock, others pretending not to see. The CEO didn't raise his voice. He simply pressed a button on his watch and whispered, "Record this, within minutes." That calm man's quiet response would shake the entire airline to its core, and by the time the plane landed, every crew member had been fired. The rhythmic hum of the private terminal was almost soothing, polished floors gleaming under soft white lights, the faint smell of jet fuel drifting in from the runway. Derek Holt, CEO of Holt Dynamics, checked his watch as he approached the gate for Flight 279 bound for London. He rarely flew commercial, but this trip was personal. He'd turned down his company's jet because he wanted to observe the airline's service firsthand, a quiet test before finalizing a $200 million contract. The airline, Aerosky International, was in the running to supply premium in-flight systems for Holt Dynamics' new luxury aircraft division. To everyone else, he looked like any other first-class traveler, clean-cut, calm, dressed in a dark cashmere blazer over a simple t-shirt. His only companion was a silver briefcase, sleek, fingerprint-locked, carrying sensitive prototype designs. No entourage. No assistant, just Derek Holt, incognito. He handed his ticket to the attendant at the gate, a young woman with a crisp uniform and a polite smile that faltered for a split second when she read his name. "Welcome aboard." "Mr. Holt," she said finally, her voice rehearsed but unsure. He smiled gently. "Thank you." Inside the aircraft, first class gleamed like a floating penthouse. Leather seats, ambient lighting, glass dividers, and the faint scent of cologne and coffee. Only 6 passengers occupied the section. Derek settled into his window seat, putting the briefcase by his side. As he powered on his tablet, a flight attendant approached. Tall, confident, her hair in a perfect bun. Her name tag read M. Lawson. "Good evening, sir. Can I get you something to drink before takeoff?" "Water's fine," he said. She nodded curtly, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. He could feel the subtle coldness, the kind that wasn't about manners, but about judgment. He'd felt it before. When she returned, she handed him the water without a word and immediately turned to the passenger behind him, a man in a suit whom she greeted far more warmly. Derek didn't react. He'd spent too many years in boardrooms full of people who underestimated him because of how he looked or where he'd come from. Let them think what they wanted. The intercom clicked on. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard Flight 279 to London Heathrow." As the plane ascended into the clouds, Derek reclined his seat and closed his eyes. It had been a long week, mergers, late nights, negotiations. This was supposed to be quiet time. Half an hour later, dinner service began. The attendant, Ms. Lawson, rolled her cart through the aisle, silver trays gleaming beneath soft cabin light. The passenger across from Derek received his meal first. Salmon with asparagus. Fine wine poured into a crystal glass. When she stopped at Derek's seat, she hesitated. "Mr. Holt," she said, glancing at her list. "It seems there's been a mix-up with your meal selection." He looked up. "A mix-up?" "Yes, it appears your special request wasn't processed correctly." "I didn't make a special request," he said calmly. "I'm fine with the standard meal." She hesitated again. "Unfortunately, we've just served the last one." He raised an eyebrow. "The last one? There's a lighter option available in economy if you'd prefer." Derek stopped her with a gentle smile. "That won't be necessary." Her tone softened a little, but the dismissive look remained. "Sorry for the inconvenience." She pushed the cart forward. "For the next 10 minutes, he sat quietly, watching as every other first-class passenger received their full course. Steak, seafood, dessert, the works. His tray remained empty. He wasn't angry. He was analyzing. He pressed a discreet button on his smartwatch, activating its internal mic. A faint red glow appeared on the display, recording live. A male flight attendant approached a few moments later. "Sir, I understand there was an issue with your meal?" "Yes," Derek said evenly. Apparently there was none left. The attendant frowned. That's odd. We always load equal portions for every seat. Ms. Lawson appeared again, her voice low but firm. It's been handled, Thomas. Thomas gave her a puzzled look, then turned back to Derek. Would you like me to check with the galley, sir? That's fine, Derek said, his tone still calm. Don't trouble yourself. He leaned back, his expression unreadable. But behind his calm exterior, 1,000 calculations were running. This wasn't about food. It was about respect, or lack thereof. And he knew better than anyone that small acts of disrespect were often magnified under pressure. He thought of the meeting waiting for him in London, the board of Airline International, the very company whose employees were serving him now. If they treated any passenger this way, it wasn't just a social problem. It was a business liability. By the time the plane reached cruising altitude, he had already made up his mind. He unzipped his briefcase slightly, revealing a sleek tablet with the Holt Dynamics logo. Inside was the pending partnership proposal with Aerosky, complete with licensing rights and digital infrastructure plans. He smiled faintly to himself. The irony was perfect. An hour later, turbulence shook the cabin gently. Passengers stirred, attendants moved to secure trays. Ms. Lawson brushed past him again, almost knocking his elbow without apology. Derek turned his gaze to the window, pretending not to notice. He could have said something. He could have called the captain, demanded her supervisor. But power, he'd learned long ago, wasn't about shouting. Power was patience. Power was timing. He simply whispered, "Mark the event," into his smartwatch, a command that tagged the recording with an automatic timestamp. He sipped his water. When the lights dimmed for the overnight portion of the flight, Derek opened his tablet again, but this time, not to read. He logged into the Aerosky Executive Communication Portal, something only accessible through a shared vendor system. His company's status gave him partial internal access. With a few taps, he retrieved the employee manifest for Flight 279. There she was, Lawson Meredith, Senior In-Flight Service Supervisor. He added her name to a flagged list on his encrypted memo. Review, personnel conduct. The irony deepened. She was technically representing the same company pitching for his contract. And now, she had unknowingly failed the most critical test, the empathy test. Derek spent the next few hours reviewing documents, outlining a subtle but effective chain of action. When the plane landed, things would move swiftly, very swiftly. Morning light bled into the cabin as Flight 279 began its descent into Heathrow. The captain's voice came over the speakers. Polite and calm, Derek stretched his shoulders, fastening his seatbelt. As the wheels touched down and the aircraft rolled to a stop, the passengers applauded lightly, the way people sometimes do at the end of long flights. Miss Lawson reappeared, standing near the exit with the polished smile of someone ready to move on to the next flight. Thank you for flying with us, she said, shaking hands and offering polite farewells to the others. When Derek reached her, she didn't seem to recognize him anymore. Just another passenger leaving. Have a pleasant day. Sir, she said, tone automatic. He met her gaze and smiled faintly. You too, Miss Lawson, she blinked. How did you... But he was already walking away. Outside, in the terminal's private arrivals lounge, 2 men in suits waited for him. They weren't security. They were corporate, wearing discreet badges with the Holt Dynamics insignia. One stepped forward. Mr. Holt, the board meeting with Aerosky executives begins in 30 minutes. Conference room C. Good, Derek said. Tell them not to start without me. He didn't need a car. He walked through the VIP corridor, calm, unhurried. By the time he reached the conference suite, the atmosphere inside was tense. 12 people sat around a glass table. The Aerosky board, including their CEO, Gerald Banks. When Derek entered, Banks rose immediately. Mr. Holt, it's an honor. I didn't realize you were on one of our flights. Derek smiled thinly. I wanted to experience your service firsthand. A few executives exchanged nervous glances. Banks laughed uneasily. I hope everything met your expectations. Derek placed his briefcase on the table, opened it, and pulled out his tablet. Not exactly. He tapped the screen. Instantly, the room filled with audio. the crisp recording from his smartwatch. Ms. Lawson's voice echoed, "There's been a mix-up. The meal isn't available for this passenger." Then the quiet silence that followed. Banks's smile disappeared. "Is this—" "Yes," Derek said calmly. "One of your senior supervisors. On your flagship route, serving a passenger who, by all appearances, didn't fit her image of first class." Banks stammered. "Mr. Holt, I assure you, this behavior is unacceptable, and we—" Derek raised a hand. "No need, I'm not here for an apology. I'm here to make a decision." He turned the tablet around. On the screen was the unsigned partnership agreement between Holt Dynamics and Aerosky International, worth $200 million in contracts and cross-brand development. "I was ready to sign this today," he said quietly. "But I believe in something stronger than contracts. I believe in accountability," Banks swallowed hard. "We'll address this immediately. Every crew member involved—" "I already know you will," Derek interrupted. "Because I'm forwarding this entire recording to your HR director, along with a recommendation for immediate disciplinary action. And for now," he tapped the screen again. The word terminated appeared across the contract. "We'll be partnering with your competitor instead." Silence fell like a blade. Derek stood, buttoning his jacket. "Good day, gentlemen." And as he left the room, his assistant, who had been waiting outside all along, handed him a phone. "Sir," she said, "Aerosky's PR team just issued an internal alert. They've suspended the entire first-class crew from Flight 279 pending review." Derek smiled faintly. Efficient. At least they move fast when their jobs are on the line. He walked toward the exit, the morning sunlight spilling through the tall glass windows. He hadn't shouted. He hadn't demanded. He'd simply let the truth speak, and it had done its work perfectly. The plane cruised smoothly at 30,000 feet, but the air inside that first-class cabin was thick with unease. Every movement now felt like part of a silent play, each actor aware of their lines but terrified of the next cue. Mr. Jordan Miles, calm, impeccably dressed, and unreadable, sat perfectly still in his seat. The hum of the engines filled the silence left behind after that awkward confrontation. He hadn't said another word since the attendant's cutting remark. He simply watched the world pass by through the oval window, city lights fading beneath a sea of clouds. Around him, people pretended to return to their books, their movies, their half-eaten meals. But every so often a passenger would sneak a glance in his direction. Who was this man who could absorb that kind of insult and still look like he was running the world? Subtle shifts. 20 minutes later, something began to shift. The senior flight attendant, Carol, came walking down the aisle with forced confidence. Her earlier smirk had disappeared. She bent slightly toward Jordan, her tone rehearsed but shaky. "Sir, I believe there's been a misunderstanding earlier. Would you like me to bring your meal now?" Jordan turned his head slowly. His expression was unreadable. His voice, steady, low, precise, cut through the hum of the engines. "Didn't you say the meals weren't available to my kind?" Carol's throat tightened. She could feel the eyes of other passengers on her back. Sir, I didn't mean it like that. It was—" He held up one hand gently, stopping her mid-sentence. "You don't need to explain. I understand perfectly." The composure in his tone was terrifying. Not angry, not loud, just calm, like someone who already knew how this would end. Carol's eyes darted toward the cockpit. Something was off. She had already received a strange message from the captain minutes ago. "Passenger in 1A, confirm name again. Don't make any more contact until we land." She hadn't dared to ask why. The call Jordan leaned back and tapped his watch again. The sleek device lit up, connecting automatically to a secure channel. He spoke in a quiet tone. "Elias, I'm airborne." It happened again. "Same pattern," a deep, composed voice replied through the earpiece. "Understood, sir." "Would you like us to begin the sequence?" Jordan looked out the window, thinking for a moment. His face softened, almost weary. "Yes. Start with the operations director. The crew's behavior will be reviewed the moment we land, quietly." "Copy that, sir." The connection ended. He took a slow breath, exhaled, and closed his eyes. A businessman in the next seat shifted uncomfortably, pretending not to have overheard a thing. but his heart was pounding. Who was this man who gave orders mid-air that sounded like military precision? "Uneasy crew in the galley," the flight attendants whispered urgently. "What's going on with the guy in 1A?" One muttered. "He hasn't complained, but the captain keeps asking for updates." Another attendant bit her lip. "I heard his name when he checked in, Jordan Miles. Does that sound familiar?" The youngest among them gasped. "Wait, like Miles Corporation? The tech conglomerate? The one that owns part of this airline?" The others froze. The hum of the plane suddenly felt deafening. Carol turned pale. "No. No, that can't be him," she said, shaking her head. "If he was someone that powerful, he wouldn't be flying commercial." "Except he is," the younger attendant whispered. "First class, quiet, no entourage. That's exactly how powerful people travel." An hour into the flight, turbulence rocked the cabin gently. The captain's voice came through the intercom, too formal to be routine. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're expecting a bit of a rough patch ahead. Please remain seated." But inside the cockpit, the captain wasn't focused on turbulence. His co-pilot had just received a priority message from HQ, encrypted and urgent. The captain's eyes scanned the note. "Immediate compliance required. Passenger Jordan Miles confirmed. CEO, Miles Global Holdings. Partner to Omega Air. Ensure his privacy and security. Prepare incident report upon landing." The captain swallowed hard. "Oh no." He looked at his co-pilot. "That attendant's done. The whole crew might be." The power shift back in first class. The energy had changed. The same attendants who'd ignored Jordan earlier now moved with robotic politeness. They offered drinks he didn't ask for, folded his napkin again, apologized for things that hadn't even happened. He said nothing, just nodded occasionally, like a man watching a chess game he'd already won 10 moves ago. At one point, a young flight attendant, nervous and trembling, approached him with a tray. "Sir, the captain sends his deepest apologies. He asked me to bring you the chef's special." Jordan looked at the tray. A fresh, steaming meal, perfectly plated. He didn't touch it. Instead, he asked quietly, "Is Carol still on duty?" The attendant froze. Yes, sir." "Tell her I'd like a word before we land." The young woman nodded and practically ran back to the galley. The confrontation Carol approached again, her steps heavy. She'd been in customer service for 18 years and had dealt with all kinds of passengers. But something about this man's calm authority unnerved her more than any confrontation she'd ever had. "Sir," she began carefully, "I'd like to sincerely apologize for what I said earlier. It was unacceptable, and I—" Jordan opened his eyes, looked directly at her, and asked softly, "Do you know who I am?" She hesitated. I think so." He leaned forward slightly, his tone level and courteous. "Then you understand why I don't raise my voice." "I don't need to." She felt the weight of those words. Each one hit harder than a scream. "Sir, please. I never meant to offend you. It was a misunderstanding." He shook his head. "No, you meant it. The only misunderstanding was thinking there would be no consequences." Carol's lips trembled. "Are you going to report me?" He looked at her kindly, almost pitying. "You've already been reported. The system you serve just doesn't know it yet." Whispers of fear words spread through the cabin faster than the drink cart. A passenger in seat 2B whispered to another, "That's the Miles CEO. He owns half the companies your airline contracts with." By the time the plane began its descent, every crew member had gone silent. The smiles were gone. Every instruction sounded mechanical. Even the captain's landing announcement had an edge of dread. Jordan calmly folded his tablet, placed it in his briefcase, and adjusted his cufflinks, custom-made, engraved with the Miles Global insignia. He didn't look angry, just deliberate, landing in silence. When the plane finally touched down, the momentary jolt startled everyone awake from the long, tense flight. Passengers began gathering their belongings, but no one in first class dared stand yet. Jordan waited until the seatbelt sign turned off. Then he rose, adjusted his suit jacket, and looked around the cabin. Carol stood by the galley, pale and motionless. He walked over to her, his tone still measured. "You know, Carol, when I was younger, I was told I'd have to work twice as hard to be treated half as well. Today reminded me that's still true." Her eyes filled with tears. "Sir, please," he interrupted gently. "Don't apologize to me. Apologize to yourself. You believe that power was in that uniform. It's not. Then he turned and walked toward the exit. Ground crew shock. The moment the aircraft door opened, the ground staff were waiting. 6 executives from airline headquarters, visibly tense. One of them stepped forward. "Mr. Miles," he said quickly, "we've just been informed of an incident on board. Please accept our sincerest apologies. We take this matter." Jordan stopped him with a slight gesture. "I'm not interested in apologies. Handle it internally, quietly." The man nodded frantically. "Yes, sir." Jordan's assistant appeared beside him, tablet in hand. "Sir, they've already suspended the entire first-class crew pending investigation. HR is on standby." Jordan's face betrayed no satisfaction, only quiet exhaustion. "Let's make sure the replacement crew get better training." "And compassion," he said. "Yes, sir." The fallout begins. Inside the terminal, Carol and the rest of the crew were escorted aside. No one explained much, but it was clear what had happened. Their names were already on a report labeled "Immediate Review." As passengers filed past, several stopped to glance at Jordan with newfound respect. Some whispered. One woman even thanked him softly for standing up without standing loud. Jordan didn't reply. He just gave her a nod, stepped into a waiting black SUV outside the terminal, and closed the door. Within seconds, 6 more identical SUVs rolled into formation behind him. As they pulled away, the reflection of the airport lights glinted off his window. He looked out, watching the fading silhouette of the plane that had carried him there. His voice, calm and almost sad, broke the silence inside the car. "Power isn't how loud you speak. It's how quietly the world listens." The driver nodded and merged into traffic. Behind them, the airline's HR phones began to ring. One by one, the crew's access badges deactivated. The flight was over, but the lesson was only beginning. The convoy of black SUVs rolled through the heart of downtown like a quiet storm. Through the tinted glass of the lead car, Jordan Miles sat motionless, his expression calm but unreadable. On his tablet screen glowed a headline from the morning's business news. Omega Air faces sudden executive shakeup. Stock drops 11% overnight. It had taken less than 12 hours. A single message from Jordan's office to the airline's parent board, one call to his firm's legal division, and a whisper to the press that an internal investigation was underway. No one outside the inner circle knew that Jordan Miles himself was the reason. The boardroom meeting at 9 a.m. He stepped out of the SUV and entered Omega Air headquarters, glass towers gleaming, the company logo shining proudly on the doors. Inside, the tension was thick enough to cut. Executives were already waiting in the top-floor conference room, eyes darting toward the entrance like nervous students waiting for the principal. The CEO of Omega Air, Richard Hale, stood to greet him. His voice was forced and careful. "Mr. Miles, we didn't expect you so soon." Jordan adjusted his cufflinks. "I don't like waiting when the issue involves respect." Hale gestured toward a seat. "Please sit. We understand there was an incident on Flight 281. Completely unacceptable, I assure you. The crew has been disciplined. We'll issue a public apology immediately." Jordan took his seat but didn't respond right away. He opened a file on the table, photographs, timestamps, transcripts of the in-flight incident already compiled by his internal team. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet. "Richard, do you know why I partnered with Omega Air 2 years ago?" Hale blinked, unsure. "Because you saw potential in our brand?" Jordan smiled faintly. "No, because I believe in people. I believed your airline represented progress, diversity, empathy, respect. I believed your employees treated every passenger as a person, not a category." The silence that followed was suffocating. He slid the file forward. "Then your staff told me in front of 30 witnesses that a man like me doesn't deserve a first-class meal." Hale's throat tightened. "Mr. Miles, Jordan raised a hand gently. "Don't explain. Just listen. The power unfolds." He turned his tablet toward them. On screen was an internal report from his corporate intelligence team. The first page displayed names, roles, and years of service, from the flight crew to the airline's training supervisors. "You don't have a few bad employees," Jordan said evenly. "You have a system that teaches arrogance and rewards bias. That's not an operational problem. That's a leadership failure." Hale's face went pale. Around the room, other executives exchanged terrified glances. Jordan leaned back, eyes cold but steady. So here's what's going to happen. He clicked a button on his watch. Within seconds, every phone in the room vibrated simultaneously. New emails. New documents, new orders. Effective immediately. Miles Global Holdings is withdrawing its technology partnership with Omega Air. All contracts regarding our AI ticketing, analytics, and maintenance systems are suspended pending legal review. Hale's voice cracked. You can't just... I can, Jordan said calmly. And I have. He stood, adjusting his tie. You'll also find a copy of my letter to your board recommending internal restructuring, starting with your chief people officer, who signed off on a bias complaint last quarter and buried it. The room was frozen. No one dared breathe. The hidden play Hale tried to recover. Mr. Miles, please. If this goes public, we'll lose hundreds of millions in valuation. Jordan turned toward the panoramic window, gazing out over the city. You'll lose more than that if you don't learn. He turned back, voice steady but sharp. Your brand thrives on comfort and privilege, two things that crumble when the wrong person tells the right story. He tapped his watch again. The wall screen behind him lit up, displaying a paused video. It was the flight footage from the cabin's security camera, the exact moment Carol, the flight attendant, denied him the meal. Hale's jaw dropped. How did you get that? Jordan gave a faint, amused smile. When you invest in a company, you learn to own the data that comes with it. The play button hovered on screen. He didn't press it. He didn't need to. The threat of exposure was louder than any recording. The quiet strike Jordan walked slowly to the head of the table. Every eye followed him. He stopped beside Hale and placed a hand on the back of his chair. Not threatening, but deliberate. I built my empire by rewarding integrity, he said softly. You built yours by pretending to care. That ends today, he turned toward the group. By tomorrow morning, I'll receive a list of new diversity and training initiatives. Real ones, transparent ones. Every crew member involved in last night's flight is to be released with full severance, and every future hire vetted under my company's ethics oversight team. Someone at the far end of the table tried to speak. But sir, the board... Jordan's gaze silenced him instantly. The board doesn't run this company anymore, he said. You do, if you survive today. Then, after a moment, now, if you'll excuse me, I have another meeting. With your competitors. He walked out, leaving the executives staring at each other like survivors of an invisible explosion. The press call by, the time Jordan's SUV reached the curb, his phone rang again. It was his communications director. Sir, the networks are already calling about a statement. How should we handle it? Jordan stepped into the car, thinking. Issue one line, he said finally. Only one? Yes, say respect is not a policy. It's a practice, and we expect our partners to live by it. The director paused. Understood. He hung up. The engine hummed as the convoy pulled away from the tower. Through the tinted window, Jordan watched the Omega Air logo fade into the distance. He didn't smile. There was no satisfaction in destroying something broken. Only clarity. The board fallout inside Omega's headquarters. Chaos erupted. Hale rushed to the board's private chamber, where emergency members were already in session. We can contain this, Hale argued, his voice shaking. We just need to delay his withdrawal, offer compensation. But one of the senior board members cut him off. He owns part of your infrastructure, Richard. Half your systems run on Miles Global Technology. If he pulls out, our entire operation stalls, another board member added grimly. The investors are already panicking. This isn't a negotiation anymore. It's survival. Hale sank into his chair, realizing the gravity. The company he once controlled was no longer his to command. Meanwhile, back in his penthouse office overlooking the skyline, Jordan poured himself a glass of water and sat by the window. On his desk lay a folder labeled Confidential Training Initiative Draft. Inside were plans his team had prepared months ago. A new corporate education program focused on empathy and equality, designed for their partner companies. He had been waiting for the right moment to push it forward. Now, the timing was perfect. His assistant entered quietly. Sir, the media wants to know if you're launching a campaign against Omega. Jordan looked up. No, he said simply. We're launching a campaign for everyone else. He handed her the folder. Send this to our PR department. Announce it as the Human Value Project. Fund it through the savings from the Omega contract termination. The assistant smiled faintly. That's poetic, sir. Jordan looked out the window again. No, it's justice with direction. The ripple effect by evening, the story had spread everywhere, not through leaks, but through whispers. Industry insiders called it the Miles Move. Airline investors rushed to reaffirm their partnerships with Miles Global. Competitors sent personal invitations, begging for new collaborations, and Omega Air's board, under immense pressure, released a public statement admitting ethical violations and leadership failure. The next day, Jordan's quote was on every major headline: "Power isn't about control. It's about accountability." The internet exploded with support. Hashtags trended, advocacy groups praised his restraint, business schools debated his strategy, and somewhere in a quiet suburb, Carol, the former flight attendant, watched the news, tears in her eyes. Not because she'd been fired, but because she'd finally seen what her words had cost. She whispered softly, "I should have just served the meal." The final call that night. Jordan received a call from a familiar voice, Richard Hale. His tone was humble, broken. "Jordan, I wanted to say I'm sorry for everything." Jordan's reply was calm. "You're not sorry for what happened. You're sorry it happened to the wrong person." Hale didn't respond. Jordan continued, his voice steady. "But you can fix it. Not for me. For the next passenger who doesn't wear a title or a suit." He paused. "Do that, and maybe one day you'll earn back what you lost today." Then he ended the call. Closing image. The camera would linger on Jordan's office window. City lights glittering below. The skyline glowing against the night. He placed his phone down beside a framed photo of his mother, the woman who taught him to never bow his head for anyone. The city skyline burned with evening gold as Jordan Miles sat alone in his office, the faint hum of traffic rising like white noise below. The day had been a victory on every measurable scale. The press called it a masterclass in silent power. His PR team said he had set a new corporate standard, but none of that felt like triumph. He hadn't touched the glass of scotch resting beside him. He just watched the sun sink behind the towers, buildings he helped build, companies he once saved, industries that now bent to his decisions. And yet, beneath all that brilliance and control, there was a dull ache he couldn't ignore, the kind that came not from failure, but from seeing too much of the world's ugliness. Too often. A call in the quiet, his phone buzzed once. A message from his assistant. Omega Air issued their apology. "The new initiative draft has been approved." "Congratulations, sir." He didn't reply. He simply stared at the word apology. It felt empty, because no apology could undo the look in that flight attendant's eyes, that mix of disdain and confidence, when she thought she could humiliate him without consequence. It wasn't the first time he'd seen that look, and he knew it wouldn't be the last. He leaned back, eyes heavy with thought. For a man who had conquered boardrooms, built billion-dollar mergers, and turned entire industries around, the war he was fighting was still the same one he fought as a boy. The war to be seen as equal. An old memory. His gaze drifted to a framed photograph on his desk, a faded picture of a younger Jordan with his mother, standing in front of a rusty old diner. She was smiling, her hand resting proudly on his shoulder, grease stains on her apron. He could almost hear her voice, soft but firm. "Don't fight to be better than them, baby. Fight to be different from them." Back then, he never understood what she meant. Now he did. He had power, unimaginable power. But sometimes that power only reminded him of how fragile dignity still was. Unexpected visitor. The quiet knock on his office door startled him slightly. His assistant peeked in. "Sir, there's someone asking to see you." "Says it's personal." Jordan frowned. "Who?" She wouldn't give her last name. "Just said she used to work for Omega Air." For a moment he hesitated. Then, "Send her in." The door opened, and Carol, the former flight attendant, stepped inside. Her uniform was gone. She wore a plain gray sweater and carried a small envelope in her trembling hands. "Mr. Miles," she began softly. "I'm sorry to come here. I needed to say something to you face to face. Jordan didn't speak. He gestured for her to sit. Though she didn't, she took a deep breath. What I said on that flight, it wasn't just cruel. It was ignorant. I thought I was protecting some kind of image, the airline's image. And in doing that, I lost my own humanity. I'm not here to beg for my job back. I'm here to return something. She placed the envelope on his desk. Inside, he saw a small pin, her crew wings. I don't deserve to wear them, she said. But maybe they'll remind you that not everyone who fails deserves to be forgotten. Jordan studied her face, not with anger, but with quiet curiosity. She looked smaller than he remembered, not physically, but emotionally, like someone who had been forced to meet herself for the first time. Do you regret what you said? He asked. Or do you regret that it was me you said it to? Tears welled in her eyes. Both, she admitted. He nodded slowly. That's honest. For a long moment there was silence. Then Jordan slid the pin back toward her. Keep it, he said. You'll need it when you start over, somewhere better. She blinked. You're forgiving me? He looked away toward the fading skyline. Forgiveness isn't the same as forgetting. But sometimes people need a second chance more than they need punishment. Carol's voice cracked. Thank you. She left quietly, the door closing behind her. Jordan exhaled, long and slow. The room felt lighter, but emptier. The speech. The next morning, Jordan stood before a packed auditorium, a press event for the Human Value Project. Cameras flashed. Reporters buzzed. His communications team urged him to smile, to sound victorious. But when he stepped up to the podium, his voice wasn't triumphant. It was tired, sincere, and deliberate. This initiative isn't about what happened to me, he began. It's about what happens to people every day, quietly, unseen, and unrecorded. He paused, scanning the room. We've built systems that value profit, policy, and convenience, but forgot the human part. The truth is, I don't want to change how companies make money. I want to change how they make people feel. The audience listened in silence. Yesterday, someone told me that respect can't be trained. I disagree. Respect can be taught, not by fear, but by example. He stepped back from the microphone. And if I have to use my influence to make that lesson mandatory, then so be it. The crowd erupted in applause, but Jordan didn't smile. Because he knew applause didn't mean understanding. It just meant people liked the sound of justice, as long as it wasn't their turn to face it. Private reflection that night. Alone again, he stood on the rooftop of his building, city lights sprawling endlessly beneath him. The wind carried the faint echo of car horns and conversations from streets far below. He thought of the woman on that flight, the fear in her eyes when she realized who he was. He thought of the boy he once was, the one who wanted the world to see him for his worth, not his color. He had won, yes. But winning didn't erase the war. He realized that the more powerful he became, the lonelier the victories felt. Because every time he fought back, he wasn't just fighting people, he was fighting an idea. A sickness, a habit the world refused to unlearn. He whispered softly to himself. Respect bought by fear isn't respect. It's delay, a letter from his mother. As he turned to head back inside, his assistant appeared again, hesitant. Sir, this came in the mail today. No sender listed. Jordan opened the envelope. Inside was an old letter, yellowed and creased. His heart tightened as he recognized the handwriting. It was from his late mother. My son, the world won't always know your name, but it will know your grace. Don't ever let success make you hard or pain make you bitter. Your kindness is your inheritance. Guard it, even when others try to steal it. A small smile crossed his face, bittersweet and fragile. He folded the letter and slipped it into his breast pocket. Maybe, he thought, the world wouldn't change overnight. But as long as he still believed in that letter, he'd keep trying, not to punish, but to prove there was a better way to win. Final scene. The next morning, Jordan sat quietly in a small diner, the kind of place his mother used to love. No assistants, no security, no schedule. The waitress, an older woman with kind eyes, approached. Coffee, honey? He smiled. Please. When she returned, she set down a steaming cup and asked gently, You look like a man who's seen too much this week. He chuckled softly. Maybe just enough. She laughed and walked away. He stared at the cup for a moment, watching the steam rise, the warmth of something simple, human, and unfiltered. For the first time in a long while, he felt peace, not because he'd won, but because he'd remembered why he fought in the first place. Outside, a news van drove past, broadcasting another headline about him. Billionaire CEO's silent stand changes corporate culture. He looked out the window, half smiling. No, he murmured to himself. It's not about changing the world. It's about reminding it. The screen would fade there, the camera lingering on his reflection in the diner window. A man who conquered power, but still carried the quiet scars of every fight that led him there. Sometimes the hardest battles aren't fought in boardrooms or on airplanes. They're fought inside, between who the world tells you to be and who you choose to remain. Fade out.